I really enjoyed this paper. It was a very interesting paper, but interdisciplinary conversation is difficult. It was tough to know exactly how to respond. One of the things is I can't speak competently on Kant. That poses a problem. It's not that I know nothing about Kant, by the way. Actually, Vittorio is here somewhere. When I first arrived at Notre Dame, Vittorio was teaching a class on Kant that I sat in. The problem was it was a 3-week course, and we read Kant's 3 critiques. So I didn't get a ton out of it. So it's not that I don't know anything about, it's not that I know nothing about Kant, it's that I know nothing about a lot of Kant. So I took my job as to sort of, in some ways, dumb this down for myself and maybe for the rest of the economists in the group. So instead of going with Kant, I was thinking of the angelic doctor, not Aquinas, instead dumbing it down further, which is Dr. Seuss. And the quote is, "A person is a person no matter how small." This is a book, I don't know if you guys know this book, by Dr. Seuss. Horton Hears a Who. And here's the story. The story is over here. And it's Horton's an elephant, and he finds a speck of dust. And on that speck of dust is a civilization of people, of persons. And he has to convince people because they don't believe him. They think it's just a speck of dust. And you read this to your kids, and I read it to my 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old instantly understands that there is great importance. The matter of this book is of great importance because they understand that no matter how small, there's something different about a speck of dust that's populated by persons than merely a speck of dust. Okay? So that's my 3-year-old. This lower picture, and His Excellency talked about Kant being amazed by the vastness of the universe. And I think we're all amazed by the vastness of the universe. So my older kids go on YouTube. They don't read books anymore. They go on YouTube and they watch these videos about the relative size of different things in the universe. And so, let's see, is this a pointer? Apparently not. Yeah, okay, well, the big circle is a star called Antares. And right here, you can't even see it, is 1 pixel, and that's the sun. And so this is amazing. And as I'm watching this video, the thing that comes to my mind is something similar to what comes to Kant's, which is, be still and know that I'm God. That's the reaction to the vastness of the universe. But probably the 17-year-old kid that posted this on YouTube, at the end of the video says, "There, now don't you feel insignificant?" And so the point is that somehow between the age of 3 and the age of 17, our thinking has changed, which is now size is more important than spirit. What my 3-year-old daughter instantly understands, the 17-year-old has forgotten. So in some sense, the last time I was here, I quoted St. Paul, and I said, we should no longer think like children. But in this case, maybe we have to become more like children. I'll quote Jesus. Okay. His Excellency analyzed the Christian anthropology from the starting point of natural reason. I'm not a philosopher, so I thought I would take the starting point of... it seems like a lot of modern philosophy is actually about reducing the assumptions. And economists love assumptions. We like to make assumptions and see where they take us, and often that's more interesting than relaxing a particular assumption. So I'm going to start with the assumptions of faith and see where it takes us. And the point here is to underscore, I'm going to go through very basic concepts, but to show you how central they are to our faith. It's not, these concepts of Catholic social thought aren't something that was just invented in the 20th century and an add-on periphery to the faith. So let's start with, before we go to the faith, let's just start with what do we mean by a person. And a person is a being with the ability to know and to love. So in that sense, Dr. Seuss has it exactly right when he says Horton hears a who, which is that a person is not something, he's someone. He's a who, not a what. Person is obviously central to a lot of the truths that we take as given in the Creed, for example. The Holy Trinity is one God and 3 persons. What does that mean? It means there's 3 who's, 3 persons, in one what? One divine nature. Jesus is 2 whats, 2 natures, a divine and a human nature, in one who? Jesus Christ. Okay? So these are central. Now, when we think of the human person, we go back right to the first chapter of the Bible, which is that God created man in his image. That's imago Dei. And what does that mean for us? Well, God is both truth, logos, and love. And man, being made in the image of God, has both reason and will. That is the capacity to know and the capacity to love. So man's reason and will are an imperfect reflection of God's, but they are nonetheless a reflection of God, and that is central to our existence, because what that does is it means that our purpose is that we're destined for God. So if you go back to the Baltimore Catechism, why did God make us? What is our purpose in life? It's to know, to love, and to serve Him in this life, and to be happy with Him in the next. That's to be in communion with God. St. Augustine says it even probably more poetically. Our hearts are made for God, and they do not rest until they rest in Him. So that's our destiny. So again, this concept of personhood is central to this. Now I want to take 5 key concepts that are derived from this idea of the human person quickly and go over them just to define them for the economists, who I think we hear these concepts, we don't exactly know what they mean. And so I'm just going to briefly explain. They're human dignity, true human freedom, solidarity, common good, and subsidiarity. Principle 1 is human dignity. What's human dignity? It's the esteem, honor, or value that all people have by right of being created in the image of God, redeemed by Christ. So that's the definition. So now, does this matter for economics? Do economists have to be concerned with this? And it does. It matters greatly for how we define our goals, for example, how we normatively evaluate policies. So by being a person, persons are ends. They're not means. Okay? And I think some people, economists understand this largely. I think people outside of economics think we don't. I think we think money's the end. And that's not the case. We had a good discussion yesterday. I think economists understand this as a discipline. We appreciate this. People are always the end goal of any normative analysis that economists do. On the other hand, as economic agents, we don't always respect the fact that humans are ends and not means. So, I'll go on. Okay. A second is that every human being is equally valued and precious to God. So the poor, the sick, the child in the womb, the killer who's on death row, they all have this potentiality or this capacity for communion with God that the bishop spoke about. Okay? And the third important principle is that man does not live on bread alone. So again, how do we define our goals of what we think is just? Economists do think about material goods. We also do research on other non-material goods, like education or health. We do some work on things like social relationships, but we do very little on spiritual goods like virtue and communion. And I guess the point is not, as an economist, that I think we should be writing papers on the economics of communion, but that we should understand, again, that the idea is that we're capturing one part of human existence and probably not the most essential part, or definitely not the most essential part. Anyway, these 3 points, when you hear the church talk about the integral human development, this is basically what they're saying. This is what true development concerns itself with. Okay. The second principle is true human freedom. And I put true because it's a different understanding than what we're used to thinking about as, Americans, for example. So will and reason give us freedom. That's moral agency. Will allows us to choose. Reason allows us to deliberate, to seek the good in accord with truth, and to not simply follow our appetites or impulses. If we're simply following our appetites and impulses, we're not free. Okay? So this understanding is much more than legal freedom. So other non-legal restrictions, for example, to freedom, are ignorance and lack of resources. There's also an internal aspect to freedom. So self-discipline and virtue make us more free. And what I tell my students in my class in Catholic Socialities, I think if you want to go to the Bible, the clearest example of this is if you think of Herod and John the Baptist, right? So John the Baptist is in jail. In a legal sense, he has absolutely no freedom. And Herod's the king. And so in some sense, legally, he has all the license in the world. But what is it? Herod likes John the Baptist. but he's unable, basically, to say no in front of his friends. Okay? So he's, in some sense, even though he's king, he's all the temporal power in the world, he has no freedom. On the other hand, John the Baptist is in a prison cell, but he is free to be true to the purpose for which he was created and to be true to God. That's a very different understanding of freedom than what we're used to, but I think it strikes, at the heart. Our freedom, the Catholic understanding, we are free, but our freedom is wounded by sin and concupiscence. That is the temptation to sin. And freedom is good. Why do we value freedom? It's because it enables us to love. It enables us to have communion with one another and with God. Love has to be a free act. Okay? Does this understanding of freedom matter for economics? I'll say yes, again. Not every action, for example, makes a person better off. The clear example is, think of an alcoholic. If an alcoholic drinks, he's not better off. In fact, he's not freer. So having the option to drink may not necessarily make him better off or free. So this is utilitarian ethics. A lot of our normative presumptions about revealed preferences, we usually assume that if we see somebody taking an action when another action is possible, that makes them better off. That's how we explain, for example, Pareto efficiency. But that's not strictly true. Okay? Another example, not every relaxation of a constraint is a good thing. Some legal freedoms, for example, license, may not promote integral human development. Another is that we value a freedom to and not just a freedom from. And so this is not just purely a Catholic concept. I take a quote from a Hindu Nobel laureate. He's a Hindu and he was a poet and a musician, Rabindranath Tagore. And he said, a violin string lying on a table is completely, this is paraphrased, a violin string lying on a table is completely unencumbered. It's free, in some sense, to take any shape and move in any direction. It's free to do anything, however, except what it was made to do. It's the discipline of tightening both ends of the string to the violin that truly liberates the string, leaving it free to make music. Okay? I guess another one that I always give my students to dumb it down again, they don't understand this, but the Eagles, the song Desperado in the 1970s, you guys remember this song? Anybody? And the quote from this song, we have a few people, okay, great. So I'll speak to you three. The quote from the song is, freedom, whoa, freedom, it's just some people talking. Your prison is walking through this world all alone. And the idea is a freedom that alienates us from society is not true freedom. Okay? So this is what's in the image of a person, a being with will and reason. What does it mean to be in the image of a Trinitarian God? A Trinitarian God, a who, going back to Dr. Seuss, a who has identity, but a who is also always in relationship with others. If there were just one who, asking who wouldn't make sense. There's just one of you, right? So who's always in relationship with others. So the Trinitarian God is a model for human community. Human beings. What about human beings? What does this mean? Well, we're distinct individuals, but by our nature we're social. And again, our purpose is we're meant for communion, not only with God, but with others. And by communion, sometimes my students don't exactly understand what communion means. I think I'm talking about Holy Communion, the sacrament. I'm talking about communion as sharing and unity with other persons while still retaining one's own identity. This is the Trinity. This is also what we're called to do. And of course, communion, the Holy Communion, the name comes from this, of course, right? Which is that we're receiving not something, but someone. So the third principle that comes from this is solidarity. And a definition of solidarity is the unity of the human family in its elements and also in its entirety. And solidarity, when we speak of solidarity, they use it in three senses because it's important to keep this in mind. One is as a reality, the second is as an obligation, and the third is as a virtue. Does solidarity matter for economics? I say yes. On the positive side, this is one of the ones that might matter. So we heard from Rachel about human beings and identity, social interaction, endogenous preferences and culture. These are sort of interesting things that I think we can consider in our model. From a normative sense, the concern for how policies impact, we should have a concern for how policies impact unity and exclusion. This is one of the reasons the church sees a role. They have an interest in inequality, a concern about inequality that's independent of poverty. because it's an exclusion. It's something that destroys the unity of the society. And Rachel talked about social conflict. That's a topic of great interest. Okay. Second, coming from our social nature is a common good. And this is how it was defined in Vatican II, which I think is the best definition I can come up with. The sum of those conditions is social life. So social life, whereby men, families, and associations more adequately and readily may attain their own perfection. And I won't go into their own perfection because I think Mary spoke very well. She explained that very well yesterday. So any community has a common good by this understanding, and it stems from our social nature. Does this concept of the common good matter for economics? And I would say yes. First of all, pursuing the common good is the sole purpose for government or for authority. It's because we have a social nature and our societies have something in common, a good, an objective that we would like to pursue that motivates leadership in government. Okay? So this means that government has a role beyond simply solving public good problems or simply enforcing contracts. So we have to think seriously about what the capabilities and also the limitations of government are. This is something I think economists, of course, do, but it's good that we do that. The fifth principle and the final principle is subsidiarity. This is the one nobody can ever remember the name for, but economists always like it. What is it? The question is, how ought a society implement the virtue of solidarity into its fiber, one, and two, how ought it pursue the common good? There's a lot of societies that have pursued the common good. We get scared by them, right? We think of communism and fascism. One is they're pursuing the wrong common good. Our common good is an objective common good. But the other is they do it in the wrong way. It's a totalitarianism. So the answer is it should follow the principle of subsidiarity. And the principle of subsidiarity says a larger society ought to assist, but never absorb the function of a person or smaller society. So if a smaller society can accomplish something, it should be left to the smaller society. What is this? This is a guideline for the exercise of authority. And there's a lot of biblical passages that one can cite for this, but the one that I like the most is when Christ says to St. Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I've prayed for you that when you return, you may strengthen your brothers. Okay? So this is a giving of authority to Peter, but it's not an authority that's lorded over his brothers. It's an authority that strengthens his brothers and assists them. And that assistance is where the subsid root comes in subsidiarity. Okay? So we have a respect for the rights of individuals, families, and smaller groups. And does subsidiarity matter for economics? Yes. Not because it's an economic principle. It isn't an economic principle of the efficiency gains of decentralization. That may match well with subsidiarity, but that's not how we want to think of it. We want to think of it as a normative imperative to address economic problems at the most local level possible. That's an ethical rule rather than a practical rule. Okay, thank you.